ovaries is the serosa or the mesothelium which is there. Then you have this epithelium which is called the germinal epithelium. So what you have is this epithelium outside on the outer aspect of the ovaries, which is called the germinal epithelium. Now the germinal epithelium is a misnomer because we know that the sex cells do not originate in either ovaries or in the testes. They come from the yolk sac during the fetal development. So germinal epithelium was called germinal epithelium because people initially thought that the oocyte is basically generated from the germinal epithelium. But this germinal epithelium, which you see on the outer part of the ovary, is not responsible for germinating the germ cells. The germ cells come from yolk sacs. Now, but there is importance of this germinal epithelium because during each ovarian cycle, one of the oocyte is going to rupture the wall and it is going to ovulate and is taken up by the fallopian tube. So, over the period of time when you would have continuous rupture of the germinal epithelium can cause ovarian cancer. So, most of the ovarian cancers are epithelial in origin and they originate from this germinal epithelium. Yes?
Those related...
because of the repeated rupture and trauma, what happens is that this germinal epithelium is responsible for 70% of all ovarian cancers. So all ovarian cancers are going to generate from the germinal epithelium. Now just below this germinal epithelium, there is tunica albuginea, as tunica albuginea you saw in the testes. So serosa, then germinal epithelium, then tunica albuginea. And then what you have is the cortex of the ovary, and then in the center you have these blood vessel filled connective tissue which is called the medulla. So you have germinal epithelium, the serosa, germinal epithelium, tunica albuginea, the cortex of the ovary, and in the center you have the medulla of the ovary. There is no clear distinction between the cortex and the medulla of the ovary, but the medullary part would include majorly the blood vessels. So blood vessel filled connective tissue you would see in the center, which is the medulla. In the cortex you would see these follicles which are growing. So you would have different follicles in the cortex in the reproductive age woman, and in the medulla you would see the blood vessel filled connective tissue. So we start from the outside. You have serosa, which is the mesothelium. Then you have the germinal epithelium, and this germinal epithelium is a single layer of cuboidal epithelium, or sometimes there is squamous epithelium. So similar to the mesothelium. So you would have the germinal epithelium, which is cuboidal or squamous. Then you have the tunica albuginea, which is the thick connective tissue layer. Below that you have the cortex of the ovary, and the cortex of the ovary would have during the reproductive life several follicles which are at different stages of development, and in the center of the ovary you would find the medulla, which is connective tissue, loose connective tissue with blood vessels, which you are seeing in the center. Okay? Now, what you need to realize is that the oocytes actually in the fetal life, they are going to divide by mitosis. And there would be several million oocyte which would be there by the 4th or 5th month of intrauterine life, because they are dividing by mitosis. Then what happens is that the at birth you would have definite set of oocytes which are held in within the first meiotic division. So they have not completed their first meiotic division. They are held within the first meiotic division. Okay? They are arrested in the first meiotic division. And roughly, by birth you have about 600,000 to 800,000 primary follicles, and these primordial follicles, around 600 or 800,000, they would be left from the millions which were produced. So from 2 million to up to 500 to 600,000 primary oocytes are there, which are arrested in the first meiotic division, which are present at birth. Rest of them have become atretic, and by apoptosis they are going to be finished. So by birth you have about 500,000 to 600,000 primary oocytes which are arrested in the first meiotic division. Now out of these 500,000 and 600,000 primary oocytes, only 400 oocytes are going to be evoluted during the whole, the reproductive life. So from birth till puberty, many further oocytes are going to become, primary oocytes are going to become atretic, and during the reproductive life from puberty to menopause, only 400 of them are going to be evoluted. So rest of them have to be destroyed. So during each menstrual cycle, there would be several primary oocyte which starts to mature, but only one is going to be ovulated. So in both ovaries, you would have several primary oocyte which starts to grow into follicles, and these follicles are going to grow, but only one of them will reach the full maturity and will ovulate. The rest of them are going to become atretic. So what you need to understand, you're starting from millions, left with 500 to 600,000 at birth, then at puberty you have further reduction, and during the reproductive life, only 400 to 500 oocytes are going to be ovulated during the whole reproductive life of female. Now, so what we need to look at is that we need to look at the stages of development of these follicles. So first thing which you are seeing here is this germinal epithelium, which you can make out. Can you make out this germinal epithelium? Yes. Okay. So it's mainly cuboidal, and in some places it is squamous. Then you have this thick connective tissue layer, which is the tunica albuginea. Then you are looking at the cortex, and in the cortex you are looking at these primordial follicles. Now the primordial follicles include the oocyte, and this oocyte is covered by this one single layer of squamous epithelium. Can you make out? So the oocyte, and then you have this one single layer of the squamous epithelium which encircles this oocyte. This is called the primordial follicles. So these primordial follicles are there, and as they are going to grow during the menstrual cycle under the influence of the hormones, we will call them growing follicles. So this is there. These are dominant type of follicles which are there after birth. You would, if you are going to see them, you would find in the cortex there are several of these primordial follicles which have a primary oocyte, and the primary oocyte is covered by a single layer of squamous epithelium. Yes?
The cells that we see in the tunica albuginea, are they fibroblasts or some other sort?
These are dense connective tissue. So dense connective tissue would have fibroblasts, would have collagen fibers. So unicalcareous, yes?
What type of collagen?
The type 4 type of collagen is there, but I don't know exact collagen constituent of unicalcareous, but definitely collagen and fibroblast are there in the same connective tissue layer. Okay. So the primordial follicle, as we said, would include a primary oocyte, and it is covered by a single layer of squamous epithelium. Now, under the influence of the hormones, the estrogen which is coming in, and the progesterone in the later part of the menstrual cycle, but estrogen in the early part will result in growing of these follicles, and as these follicles are going to grow, we call them growing follicles. So the first one which you are going to see is called the primary follicle. So from primordial, now we are going towards the primary follicle. So this is the primordial follicle, which has the oocyte, and there is a single layer of the squamous epithelium. Now, as this follicle, the single layer becomes from squamous to cuboidal, we call it the primary follicle. And also what happens is that this oocyte is going to secrete a glycoprotein layer around it, which is called the zona pellucida. So the zona pellucida is secreted between these follicular cells, which are now called the granulosa cells. So once they change from the squamous epithelium to cuboidal epithelium, we call them granulosa cells. And the other change which happens, that oocyte is going to secrete a glycoprotein layer around it, which is called the zona pellucida. So there would be a zona pellucida which is produced. The squamous cells have become cuboidal with a basement membrane here, and so there is a basement membrane or basal lamina on which these cuboidal cells are there, and this is called now the granulosa cells. So yes,
This change is stimulated by estrogen.
this change is going to be stimulated by estrogen, because these granulosa cells are the ones which are going to secrete the estrogen and will result in the change of the squamous epithelium into cuboidal cells. Yes.
So when the zona pellucida is formed, we call it granulosa.
Yes. So there are two changes. One is there is a glycoprotein layer around the oocyte, primary oocyte, which is called the zona pellucida, and the squamous cells which were encircling the primary oocyte, now they become cuboidal, and they are now called granulosa cells. And there is a basal lamina on which these granulosa cells are lying. Yes.
The zona pellucida is secreted by the granulosa cell or by the primary oocyte?
No, primary oocyte is going to secrete a glycoprotein layer around it, which is called the zona pellucida. Now, zona pellucida has three types of glycoprotein: ZP1, ZP2, and ZP3. ZP3 is very important because ZP3 is the one which has receptors for attachment of sperms. So the zonal reaction only happens when the acrosomal cap is going to attach with the ZP3 on the zona pellucida. So there are three types of proteins: ZP1, ZP2, and ZP3. ZP3 are the main receptors for the attachment of the sperms. ZP2 help in this attachment, and the function of ZP1 we don't know. So these are the three types of zona pellucidal proteins: ZP1, 2, and 3. And we know that ZP3 are the ones which are mainly responsible for the attachment of sperms. Now, as the primary follicle is going to grow, there are going to be certain other changes. One is that this cuboidal epithelium, which you see as a single layer, is going to become multi-layered. So there would be multi-layered granulosa cells. So as you go in further, you would start to see that this is the oocyte, and then you can see the zona pellucida, and then you can see that there are multi-layers of granulosa cells. And these granulosa cells are present over the basal lamina. So this is the basal lamina which is separating it from the rest of the connective tissue. Now this connective tissue also starts to align itself around the primary follicle, and you would have these connective tissue layers which is just adjacent to the granulosa cells, which is called the theca interna, and then you have the theca externa, which is outer to the granulosa cells. So you have the oocyte, then you have zona pellucida, then you have multi-layered granulosa cells. The granulosa cells are present over the basal lamina, and outside the basal lamina you would have the connective tissue which is going to organize itself into theca cells, and there would be a theca interna and theca externa. Theca interna would be much more like steroid secreting cells. So although it is a connective tissue, but it would have the cells which would have characteristics of steroid secreting cells. So they would have smooth ectoplasmic reticulum, they would have mitochondria. So what you would see is that you would have an oocyte encircled by zona pellucida. Outside that is several layers of granulosa cells, and after that you have the basal lamina, and the connective tissue layer is going to organize itself into the theca interna, which is more like a steroid secreting cells, and then outer to that would be rich connective tissue, which is the theca externa. So if we look at the primary follicle, the primary follicle has a primary oocyte, then you have the zona pellucida, then you have multi-layered granulosa cells, then you have the basal lamina, outer to that is the theca interna, which are steroid secreting cells, and outer to that would be the theca externa, which is mainly a vascular connective tissue. The primary follicle started with one single layer of cuboidal cells. Now there are multiple layers, and outer to that is theca interna and theca externa. Now, what is the importance of this theca interna and theca externa? The theca interna cells would have the receptors for luteinizing hormone, the LH. So what happens that under the influence of LH, the theca interna cells are going to, as we said, they are steroid secreting cells, they are going to secrete androgens. And these androgens are going to pass through the granulosa cells, because granulosa cells are, they are not attached with the zona fluidus. They are spaces, gap junctions between them, so that the nourishment can pass towards the ovum. So there is no barrier here. Like in testes, you have the blood testis barrier between the sertolae. There is no barrier here because the primary oocyte is still held in first meiotic division. It has not completed the first meiotic division. So there is no reason for antigenic response from the blood vessel. So what you have, there is no barrier here in the granulosa cells. There are gap junctions, so the nourishment can move towards the ovum from the blood vessels in the theca. And also the hormone which is secreted by the androgens, which are secreted by the theca interna, are going to act on the granulosa cells. And the granulosa cells, under the influence of FSH, will convert these androgens into estrogen. And estrogen is important for the growth of this follicle, because this follicle is going to grow, the granulosa cells are going to grow, the size of the follicle is increasing. So estrogen is important in the growth of this follicle, and estrogen is also affecting the uterine tissue, where the endometrium is also growing under the influence of the estrogen. So as these follicles are growing during the proliferative phase of the menstrual cycle, similarly in the uterine wall, the endometrium is also growing. So you need to keep in mind, this estrogen which is going to be secreted by the growing follicle is going not only is important in the growth of the follicle, but it is also important in the growth of the uterine wall. And there are several of these follicles. Not only one follicle is growing, there are several follicles at the same time growing, but only one is going to reach the maximum maturity, and it is going to be ovulated. So this is the primary follicle. So this is the maximum what you would see in the primary follicle. So from primordial follicle, the change in the primary follicle, you can see that in the primordial follicle there was one oocyte lined by one layer of the squamous epithelium. Then in the primary follicle, you have the zona pellucida coming in, and you have the granulosa cells coming in, which are the single layer of cuboidal epithelium. And as they grow further, they would become multi-layered, cells, which are granular cells. And outside the granular cells, you had now the theca interna and theca externa. So this is what you have when you have the primary follicle. When primary follicle is going to change from primary to secondary, what happens? We are going to talk about it now. So from primary follicle to the secondary follicle, what happens is that within the granulosa cells, there would be spaces start to appear. And as these spaces are going to join, they are going to give rise to an antrum. So follicular antrum, or the cavity of the follicle, starts to appear. So there would be initially small spaces which start to appear in the granulosa cells because of the fluid released by them, and these spaces are going to join to give rise to a concentric antrum, or the cavity, which is called the follicular antrum. Once you have the follicular antrum formed, then it is called the secondary follicle. Now, at this stage, you would have the size of the follicle is about 0.2 millimeter, and when it is going to grow to the mature follicle, it would have a size of 10 millimeters. So you can see as these spaces are going to increase, one of the follicle is going to reach a size of 10 millimeter, and it is going to bulge from the surface of the ovary, which will result in the rupture of the germinal epithelium and release of the ovum. Now, as this cavity is going to increase, this secondary follicle is going to change into a larger follicle where there will be a larger cavity, and that is called the Graafian follicle, which is the mature form of the follicle. So what you are going to see in the Graafian follicle, you would have a couple of layers of the zona glomerulosa. There would be a large antral cavity, and there would be part of the granulosa cells which are going to cover the oocyte. And these cells which are going to cover the oocyte are called cumulus ophorus. So cumulus ophorus are part of the granulosa cells which are covering the oocyte. The rest you see a large antral cavity and couple of layers of zona glomerulosa cells, and outer to that there would be theca interna and externa. So this is the shape of the Graafian follicle, which is a large secondary follicle, and it has a very large cavity, and you can see that as the cavity is going to grow, the attachment of glomerular cells with each other will become lower and lower, so that once it is going to burst, the ova can be easily secreted out. The other important thing is that in rest of the follicles, which are not going to grow to the Graafian follicular level, the glomerular cells are going to start to secrete a molecule which is called oocyte maturation inhibitor, OMI. So what happens that because the oocyte maturation inhibitor is secreted by the granulosa cells themselves, many of these follicles will stop to grow and they would not, increase in size. So the level of the secretion of oocyte maturation inhibitor within the antral cavity will determine how much the follicle is going to grow. In smaller follicles, there would be a higher level of oocyte maturation inhibitor. In large follicles, you would have lower levels of oocyte maturation inhibitor. So this is how the one of the follicles is going to mature to the highest level, while the rest of them are going to stop maturing because the granulosa cells are going to secrete a molecule which is called the oocyte maturation inhibitor, OMI. Okay? So what would happen to the rest of them once there is ovulation and one of the oocyte is basically ovulated? The rest of them are going to become atretic. So they are going to atrophy all the rest of the follicles which do not reach to the level of maturity. After the ovulation, all the rest are going to become atretic follicles. I will show you in a minute what is an atretic follicle, but we need to talk about a little bit on the ovulation. So at the time of ovulation, when you have the LH surge and one of the follicle is going to rupture, and the mature follicle is going to rupture and is going to release the oocyte. The oocyte is going to complete its first meiotic division, and there would be first polar body which is going to be released. So at the time of ovulation, when there would be an LH surge, there would be rupture of the Graafian follicle, the mature follicle, and the primary oocyte which was there is going to be converted into secondary oocyte by the completion of the first meiotic division and production of the first polar body. Now, if this is going to fertilize, then the second meiotic division is going to happen. So, what you need to understand is that this is the mature ovarian follicle, which is the Graafian follicle. So the rest of them are going to become atretic, and they are going to be, absorbed by the epithelium and the connective tissue layers within the ovary, and you would not see any, remnants of these follicles within the ovary. So over the period, as the rest of the follicles are going to become atretic, they would be absorbed by the apoptotic cells within the ovary, and you would not see the remnants of the other follicles except the one which is, which has already,
We have two phases of atresia. Yeah, the secondary follicles undergo atresia. Before that, the primary follicles also.
I don't get what.
The primary follicles aren't mature enough to become secondary follicles undergo atresia as well.
Yeah, so there are primordial follicles which are there always, and during each menstrual cycle, these primordial follicles are going to change into primary and secondary, and one of them is going to reach the Graafian follicle stage. All the rest, the primary and secondary follicles, are going to become atretic, and they are going to finish off. Okay? The cells, because they are going to be around the oocyte. So it looks like a crown, because these cells are around the oocyte, covering it from the outside. So these are the cells of Cumulus oophorus, which when the ovum is going to be released, they would be forming the corona radiata. Okay. The other thing which you need to understand is that once the Graafian follicle, which is going to release the ovum, the follicle is initially, once it has released the ovum, the blood vessels in the tunica, in the theca interna and externa are going to rupture, and the blood will start to accumulate inside the cavity of the Graafian follicle. So once the Graafian follicle has, ruptured and it has overluted the ovum, the blood starts to accumulate inside the cavity of the Graafian follicle, and now you call it corpus hemorrhagicum. So corpus hemorrhagicum because the blood starts to accumulate inside the cavity of the Graafian follicle. It is coming from the theca, theca interna and externa cells where you have the blood vessels. So blood starts to accumulate within the cavity of the Graafian follicle, and now it is called corpus hemorrhagicum. And then there would be changes in the theca interna and the granulosa cells, and these granulosa cells are going to become large lipid-filled cells, and now we are going to call them corpus, the granulosa lutein cells, and then there would be the theca cells, theca interna cells, which are going to become small and darkly stained, and we call them the theca lutein cells. So there would be two types of cells which are going to appear. The granulosa cells are now going to change into granulosa lutein cells, which are large steroid-filled, lipid droplet-filled cells, and the other type of cells, which were the theca interna cells, they are now going to change into the theca lutein cells. And this Graafian follicle, which has overluted the ovum, is going to change into corpus luteum. So now corpus luteum, as we said, would have two types of cells. One is the theca lutein cells, which are small, darkly stained, and the granulosa lutein cells, which are large lipid droplets containing cells. And these granulosa lutein cells are the ones which are releasing the progesterone. And progesterone is important for development of the uterine wall for receiving the fertilized ovum. If there is no progesterone, the wall of the uterus, the endometrium, is not going to be prepared for receiving a fertilized ovum. If fertilization is going to happen, then the corpus luteum will continue, because there would be beta HCG coming out from the ovum, which will maintain the corpus luteum. But if there is no beta HCG coming out, after 10 or 12 days, the corpus luteum is going to degenerate, and it is going to change into an atretic follicle. So what you have is corpus hemorrhagicum, then it becomes the corpus luteum, and then it becomes corpus albicans. So it starts from the corpus hemorrhagicum, which the blood coming into the cavity of the Graafian follicle, and that makes a clot there, giving rise to corpus hemorrhagicum. Once the granulosa cells and the theca cells convert into granulosa theca cells and granulosa the theca interna, theca lutein cells, then you have the corpus luteum, and corpus luteum is the one which is secreting progesterone. If there is fertilization, beta HCG will keep on maintaining the corpus luteum till the time the placenta takes the function for the nutrition for the ovum. But if there is no fertilization, by 10th or 12th day, the corpus luteum is going to degenerate, and it is going to become the corpus albicans. So these are the stages of development of the follicle. So you start with the primordial follicle, then it converts into the primary follicle. Primary follicle converts into the secondary follicle. Secondary follicle, one of them is going to have a very large cavity, which is for the Graafian follicle. The Graafian follicle is going to rupture at the time of ovulation, and then will convert into corpus hemorrhagicum, because there would be the hemorrhage inside the follicle from the vessels in the theca interna and theca externa. This is the theca interna cells and granulosa cells, then will convert into granulosa lutein cells and theca lutein cells. Granulosa lutein cells are the ones which are going to start secreting the progesterone. This is important for the development of the uterine wall for the reception of the fertilized ovum. If there is no fertilization, the corpus luteum is going to involute after 10 to 12 days, becoming the corpus albicans. Okay, next we are going to talk about the fallopian tubes. The fallopian tubes have different parts. You have the fibria, which is just over the top of the ovary, the post. Then you have the infundibulum, the part which is the infundibulum, which has the distal part, which is called the fibria. The largest part is the ambula, and then you have the isthmus, and then you have the interstitial part. So infundibulum, ambula, isthmus, and the interstitial part. The infundibulum has the terminal end, which is called the fibria, and the fibria is responsible for receiving the ovum. Now what you also need to understand is that this fallopian tube is responsible for conducting the ova into the uterine cavity, and ampulla is the major site where the fertilization usually happens. Now if we look at the epithelium of the fallopian tube, first what you need to understand is that the mucosa of the fallopian tube is basically set into different folds. So that's why you see the lumen of the fallopian tube it has several folds here, because the mucosa is basically set into several folds. The epithelium here is simple columnar ciliated and simple columnar non-ciliated epithelium. So there is a ciliated epithelium and there is a secretory epithelium. Ciliated epithelium is more towards the infundibulum and the ampulla, and towards the isthmus and the uterine cavity you have more of the secretory epithelium. During the menstrual cycle, the size of the epithelial cells also increase. So during the proliferative phase, the size is going to increase, and during the secretory phase, the size of the fallopian tube epithelium is going to increase. And then you have the smooth muscular wall. So you can see the epithelium, and then you have the smooth muscular wall of the fallopian tube. So this is the epithelium gone into fold, which is simple columnar ciliated or simple columnar epithelium, non-ciliated, which is a secretory epithelium, and you can also see the smooth muscle layer which is there in the fallopian tube. Now, the fallopian tubes, the ciliary movement within the fallopian tubes is towards the uterine cavity. So it is basically responsible for pushing the ovum towards the fallopian, towards the uterine cavity. And also there is peristaltic movement, so smooth muscles are going to contract, and there will be peristaltic movement moving the ovum towards the uterine cavity. The sperm, on the other hand, has to move towards the opposite side, and it is basically said that the sperms are going to, the movement in the sperm is so fast that it would hardly be affected by the cilia or the peristaltic movement. So peristaltic movement and the cilia are mainly responsible for the movement of the ovum towards the uterine cavity, while the movement of the sperm is because of their tails, and their movement is towards the ovaries. So it's the movement of the sperm is independent of cilia and the peristaltic movement which is there in the fallopian tube. Yes.
Is this a smooth muscle layer or the myoid cell?
Smooth muscle layer, this one. This is a smooth muscle layer. So there is a smooth muscle layer. So you have in the fallopian tube the epithelium, which is gone into folds. It's a ciliated epithelium and non-ciliated epithelium. Non-ciliated epithelium is mainly a secretory epithelium, which is giving secretion for the nourishment of the ovum. So you need nourishment of the fertilized cell, and that is through the secretory epithelium. And ciliated epithelium is responsible for moving the ovum towards the uterine cavity. Plus, there is peristaltic movement, which is going to push the ovum towards the yes.
Where is this located?
Mainly in the infundibulum and the ampulla. Those are the areas where you would find more of the abundance of the simple columnar ciliated epithelium, which is responsible for moving the ovum towards the uterine cavity. Now, there are certain diseases like pelvic inflammatory disease, which can result in the damage to the cilia, and so infections traveling through the cervix into the uterus to the fallopian tubes, which can damage the cilia in the fallopian tubes, can result in immobility of the cilia and can also result in infertility. So if you have chronic diseases or chronic infection of the pelvis, which is called the pelvic inflammatory disease, it can lead to damage to the cilia. It can also lead to narrowing of the lumen of the fallopian tubes, and it can lead to either infertility or ectopic pregnancy also. Because if you have tubal obstruction, this can lead to ectopic pregnancy also. And ectopic pregnancy, 98% of the time, is in the fallopian tubes. So pelvic inflammatory disease, tubal ligation, damage to the fallopian tube can lead to either infertility, and it can also lead to higher chances of ectopic pregnancy. And ectopic pregnancy is usually in 98% of the time is in the fallopian tube. And it is an obstetric emergency because the fallopian tubes doesn't have that big of size, and by the 8th week of development, usually if there is an ectopic pregnancy which is there in the fallopian tube, it is going to rupture, leading to massive hemorrhages and death if it is not secured. The epithelium here can become inflamed, leading in the pelvic inflammatory diseases, leading to infertility, as well as it can lead to ectopic pregnancy. Here you are seeing the two types of cells. So these are the ciliated cells, and then you can also see the secretory cells, which have no cilia here, and they are mainly responsible for secreting mucus, and they are secreting content which is important for the nourishment of the fertilized ovum. Here you are seeing the mucosa, which is the epithelium, and then you can see the smooth muscle fibers, which are important in terms of the muscular wall of the fallopian tube, and it helps in peristaltic movement of the fertilized ovum towards the uterine cavity. Now we are coming to the uterus. The uterus has 3 layers: the endometrium, the myometrium, and the perimetrium. So the endometrium is the mucosa, and this mucosa has the epithelium, which is the simple columnar epithelium, and then you have the stroma, and this stroma has connective tissue, and it also has glands. So there are simple tubular glands within the endometrium of the uterus. Plus, it also have blood vessels, and this stroma has blood vessels which are coming from the myometrium. So in the myometrium, there are arcuate vessels from where you would have the straight vessels coming out, and from the straight vessels you have these spiral vessels coming out. And these spiral vessels are going to enter into the stroma of the endometrium. So the distal part of the spiral vessels, which is the coiled part of the spiral vessel, is present in the stroma of the endometrium. The early part of the spiral arteries are present within the myometrium. So in the myometrium, from the uterine artery, you would get first the arcuate artery. The arcuate artery is going to give straight arteries. Straight arteries are going to give rise to spiral arteries. The spiral arteries, the early part is present in the myometrium, and then the distal part of these spiral arteries is getting into the stroma of the endometrium, and it is going to supply the lacunae, which are the blood-filled spaces within the endometrium. There are two parts of the stroma of the endometrium. One is called the stratum functionalis, and this stratum functionalis is the one which is going to be sloughed off during the menstruation. And then there is stratum basalis, which is the basal layer of the stroma of the endometrium, which remains there and is not going to be sloughed off during the menstruation. So part of the endometrium is going to be sloughed off during the menstruation, and that is called the stratum functionalis. The part which is not going to be sloughed off is called the stratum basalis. So endometrium consists of, simple columnar epithelium. It has in the stroma the glands, which are called the simple tubular glands. But these tubular glands, as they go down, they are going to branch. So they are simple tubular branch glands. And then in the stroma, you have these blood vessels, which are the terminal parts of the spiral artery. Part of this stroma is going, and the endometrium is going to be sloughed off, which is called the stratum functionalis. The part which is not going to be sloughed off is called stratum basalis. In the myometrium, you have the three layers of smooth muscle fibers. There is no particular arrangement, but usually the outer longitudinal and inner longitudinal is there, and then you have in the middle oblique layer or spiral layer of the muscles. And perimetrium is the outer aspect of the uterus, which is partly covered by the peritoneum. So there is serosa and partly adventitia, which is there in the perimetrium. So endometrium, myometrium, and perimetrium, these are the three layers of the uterus. So if we see here, this is the endometrial surface. So you can see the simple columnar epithelium, and then you can see the stroma here, which consists of the connective tissue material. In the menstrual phase, there is no fertilization, no implantation, and there is degeneration of the corpus luteum. So there is secretion of estrogen and progesterone. And as I said, there is blood vessels which are passing from the myometrium into the endometrium, and mainly the spiral arteries which are reaching the distal part of the spiral arteries which are reaching in the endometrium. So as the estrogen and progesterone levels are going to go down, during the later half of the menstrual cycle, what would happen is that these spiral arteries will go into vasospasm. And because they are supplying the endometrium and they go into vasospasm for hours, this will lead to ischemia of the endometrium, and as a result there would be sloughing of the tissue. So degeneration of the superficial layers of the endometrium and leakage of the blood into the stroma. This is because of the vasospasm of the spiral arteries, which is there because of the decreased estrogen and progesterone level. Yes.
Is the ischemia with spiral arteries the reason for menstrual cramps? Is the ischemia the reason for menstrual cramps?
Yes. So stromal cells disintegrate, individual glands are going to collapse, and further ischemia leads to degeneration of the whole stratum functionalis, which is progressively shed as menses. So during menstruation, you see the sloughing of the epithelium, you see the sloughing of the terminal parts of the blood vessels, especially the veins, because you have the vasospasm of these spiral arteries because of the low levels of progesterone and estrogen. So what you are going to see is the hemorrhages and the sloughing of the epithelium because of the decreased blood supply or ischemia caused by these spiral arteries. Now, in the early proliferative phase in the endometrium, that means we are talking about the first half of the menstrual cycle, which is proliferative, and after ovulation, we are going to talk about the secretory phase of the menstrual cycle. So, in the proliferative phase, in the early part, there is relatively thin endometrium. Glands are fairly sparse and straight. Endometrium gradually becomes thicker due to the proliferation of the glands. Surface epithelium regenerates. The epithelial cells acquire cilia and microvilli. The glandular epithelium consists of columnar cells with basal nuclei, and mitotic figures in both epithelium and stroma are there. In the late part of the proliferative phase, the endometrium has doubled in thickness. Glands become coiled more closely. Stratum functionalis thickens while the stratum basalis is unchanged. Stroma is elevators. Mitotic figures are there. Lymphocytes and occasional lymphoid aggregation can be seen. But what you are going to see in the proliferative phase is that the thickness of the endometrium is about 3 millimeters. So the thickness is going to be around 3 millimeters. In the secretory phase, it is going to become doubled and it will become up to 6 millimeters. But in proliferative phase, the thickness of the endometrium is around 3 millimeters. You would see the glands, but these glands are straight. You would see the spiral arteries, but these spiral arteries are not that much coiled. So you would see in the proliferative phase spiral arteries. You would see in the proliferative phase the glands, but they are tubular glands, they are not coiled. The thickness of endometrium as compared to the secretory phase would be about 3 millimeters, while in the secretory phase there would be 6 millimeters. So if you see here, in the proliferative phase, you start to have the reconstitution of the endometrial epithelium. You start to see these glands which are there. So the glands are still there, but they are tubular glands, simple tubular glands here. You can see the mitotic figures which you are seeing within these cells. So there is mitotic figures, but if we will compare this with the secretory phase, you will start to understand how much the difference is there. So you see the glands, you see the basal lamina. This is the stratum functionalis, this is the stratum basalis, this is the myometrium. So the glands are limited up to the stratum functionalis. You would see that the stratum functionalis is not that big as you would see in the secretory phase. So if we go into the secretory phase, now you would start to see the glands much more coiled. You see this? The glands are going all the way here. They are much more coiled as compared to the secretory phase. You would see far more mitotic figures. You would see a lot of these blood vessels, and you can see the coiling of the glands, which is the hallmark of the secretory phase of the endometrium. In postmenopausal endometrium, as a result of the cessation of estrogen and progesterone and production by the ovaries, the whole genital tract undergoes atrophic changes. So you have endometrium, which is thin, consisting of only stratum basalis. Glands are sparse and inactive. Glands show no features of proliferation. There will be no mitotic figures, no secretory activity. In some moment, the glands will become dilated to form cysts. Epithelial cyst is flattened and stroma is much more less cellular and contain more collagen fibers. With the myometrium, you should also know that within the myometrium you can have a tumor of the smooth muscles from the myometrium, which is called the uterine leiomyoma, because this is a smooth muscle. Any tumor from the benign tumor from the smooth muscle is called leiomyoma. So benign tumors from the uterine wall, they are going to form, from the myometrium, they are going to form uterine leiomyomas, and in layman terms they are called fibroids. And fibroids can either bulge into the cavity of the uterine cavity. This can lead to infertility, or they can be serosal fibroids which are bulging outside and give an irregular shape to the uterus. Anyways, the uterine leiomyomas are one of the reasons for menorrhagia or heavy menstrual bleeding. They are also the reason for infertility. So it is an important, and it's quite common to have fibroids in reproductive age women. Now we are coming to the cervix. The cervix is basically a canal which is a continuation of the uterus. But the cervix does not go into similar changes as which you see with the uterus, the rest of the uterus during the menstrual cycle. There is an endocervical canal, so you have an internal os on the inner side and an external os on the outer side, and in between there is the cervical canal. Now, the outer aspect of the cervix, which is on the external os part, is covered by the stratified squamous epithelium, while the cervical canal and the inner aspect of the cervix is covered by columnar epithelium. And there is an abrupt change from the columnar epithelium to the stratified squamous epithelium at the external os. So what you are seeing here is that this is the columnar, simple columnar epithelium, and at the junction of the cervix with the ectocervix, there is a sudden change into the stratified squamous epithelium. Cervical stroma is usually not influenced by the estrogen. What you also need to understand is that within the stroma there are glands here. So there are the stroma of the cervix is rich in gland, which is going to secrete mucus, and this mucus is going to change during the menstrual cycle. So, for example, in the proliferative phase of the menstrual cycle, there would be a copious amount of the mucus which is going to be secreted by the cervical glands, and the mucus is going to be thin, and it is going to facilitate the movement of the sperms. During the secretory phase, however, the mucus is going to become thick, and it will not facilitate the movement of these sperms through the cervical canal. So the cervical glands are responsible for secreting mucus, and this mucus is copious and thin during the proliferative phase, which allows the sperms to move up the cervical canal into the uterine cavity, while in the secretory phase this mucus becomes thick, and it will not allow the sperms to move up the cervical canal. The other thing which is important is that during the uterine cycle, during the menstrual cycle, there is desquamation of the cells, the cervical cells into the vagina, and we can actually make a slide of these cervical cells and see if there is any plastic changes or tumor cancer-related changes in these cells, and this is done through Pap smear, which is the common screening test to look for cervical cancer. Now, cervical cancer is not that much common because the we have now vaccines against human papilloma virus, which is the major causative agent in the cervical cancer. So HPV is the major causative agent for the cervical cancer, and now because we have very good vaccines against HPV and vaccinate everyone from 13 to 26 years of age, both males and females. So cervical cancers have become much reduced in our setups. Okay, now we are coming to the last part. The vagina consists of 4 layers. There is epithelium, lamina propria, muscularis, and adventitia. So there is a stratified squamous epithelium. Below that there is lamina propria. Then you have the muscularis, which is the smooth muscle fibers, and then the adventitia. The features of lamina propria includes the fibrous, highly elastic lamina propria, which consists venous plexus and no glands. So in vagina you have no glands. The secretions in the vagina are coming either from the cervical glands or from the vestibular glands, which are at the vestibule in the vagina. So there is no glandular structure within the vagina. So the lubrication is either coming from the mucus secreting glands from the cervix or from the vestibular gland from below, which are responsible for lubrication. Yes?
The dietary surface slide?
Yes.
You said there is a stratified squamous epithelium and a simple lamina. What is the stratified squamous?
So at the ectocervix there is the stratified squamous epithelium. Endocervix and the cervical canal, you have the simple columnar epithelium. Okay. Epithelium of the vagina undergoes cyclical changes, produce glycogen and anaerobically metabolized by vaginal bacteria, which inhibits the growth of pathogens in the vagina. Thank you very much. Stop there.